Welcome back to the ThermoDiet podcast. Today we've got a very special episode for you guys where we are joined by a doctor of optometry, Dr. Taylor DeGroot. How you doing today, Taylor?
Hi, how are you? Thanks for having me.
So I thought it'd be a fun question to start off with. What does a typical day you sign up or I sign up to work with you as a doctor of optometry? And how does your practice differ from a regular optometrist or ophthalmologist?
So basically, I work with clients one-on-one, just like health coaching, helping them with their eye problems. So anything from like cataracts to like something like a rare genetic eye condition. So basically, I do bioenergetic testing. So that's based off clients' hair and saliva. We can do that remotely. Basically, that gives me a good idea of where their imbalances are, mineral deficiencies, vitamin deficiencies, and it also tells me like if there's like parasites, mold, or bacteria that's affecting their eyes. I also really like it because you can kind of tell what remedies will work best for people. So if that's like homeopathics, just like supplements in general or any dietary changes, it really gives me a good direction on how to work best with clients. So I love that. But yeah, so how it differs is your general eye doctor obviously wouldn't be doing bioenergetic testing. I definitely think there is like important things an eye doctor, like a conventional eye doctor has to offer, like visual field testing, that can be helpful. Even things like OCT, which is basically kind of like taking an ultrasound of the retina, and that tells you like how many cells there are. So that's a good way to kind of early detection. And I really think things like Alzheimer's can be diagnosed early using like looking at the cells in the retina.
Wow.
So that's kind of cool. There's a lot of like really cool technology. The other thing that's cool when you go to an eye doctor is that you can get a picture of your retina. And then just by looking at the blood vessels in the retina, you can actually tell if someone has like hypertension. You can also see if someone has something like macular degeneration, which is a buildup of lipofuscin in the retina.
I did not know that.
So there's definitely things that I like about conventional practice. The technology is really cool, but for like chronic diseases, it's good at like detecting, obviously, and it's also important for early detection. But in terms of like what you can do with like insurance and things like that, you can't really spend as much time as I can with patients, working on, everything from like diet to like detoxing, supplements. You can't really do all of that. So I definitely think both are important. It's just a shame there's not a better way to like integrate the two.
Yeah. Do you work with other doctors at all via like ophthalmologist?
No, I don't currently.
Okay.
I'm just doing this on my own. But yeah, I mean, I definitely think for what I do, it's good for me to know like what their doctor says and everything. And I definitely don't tell people like, don't go to the eye doctor.
Yeah.
It's definitely important information for me to know. But as far as like seeing their scans and things like that, it's like not as important, just because once I know the diagnosis, I pretty much, I know how to go from there.
So the first thing you do when you walk into the eye doctor, pretty much, well, usually they dilate your eyes, which I know, there's some problems with the typical vision test, but what does 20/20 vision actually mean? Because that's what we're, I guess, all going for. It's normal vision, would you say?
Yeah, so 20/20 is kind of like what they want you to get down to. And usually once you get 20/20 vision, the doctor is like, oh, okay, your vision's perfect. But yeah, there's definitely more to vision than just, seeing 20/20 on an eye chart. When we think about the eye, it's really like a reflection of your brain, and it tells you like what's going on in the brain. So basically, like we actually have visual fibers that go to other parts of the body. So like 20% of your visual fibers are actually going to other parts of the body.
What do you mean by that?
So like you have, your visual cortex, and 20% of the fibers that are coming from your visual cortex are actually going to other parts of the body. So it's not all just like, basically there's this whole idea that there's like eyeballs kind of like all over the body.
Wow.
And that's, I think, how people have, like, I read Dr. Lieberman's book, and he talks about how in a meditation, he was able to just like get his vision back to like 20/20 perfect seeing. So I really think there's a lot more that we don't know. You know, they say like you only use like 1% of your brain.
Mm-hmm.
It's probably similar idea with vision, where we're not using like all the potential that we have because we're so used to relying on the same like pathways.
They talk a lot about that in PRI as well, which we'll probably dive into, but how kind of a lot of times your compensations are your superpowers. Like, so that the power lifter, the lineman can't move very well, but that allows them to produce a ton of force, which is interesting. It's kind of a
That's interesting
corollary thing. So back to 2020, what does it literally mean?
Yeah, so it literally means that you can see, so it's based off of, so it's like test distance over letter size. That's what like 20/20 stands for. So the test distance is 20 feet and the letter size is 20. So basically, I think the problem, I don't think everyone should be corrected to 20/20, because let's say like you're being corrected to 20/20 and they're like, okay, these are your glasses. You're nearsighted, which means you can't see far away.
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, okay, wear these all the time. What that means is that if you're wearing them up close, those glasses are 20 times too strong.
Wow.
So you don't want to be wearing glasses that are 20 times too strong when you're like doing near work or like you're on the computer. That's super damaging. And that's actually, I think, why a lot of people progress as they do and have to go back every year and get worse. It's because they're literally wearing glasses that are 20 times too strong most of the day.
That is interesting. Generally, when people begin to lose their vision, or I guess their vision becomes worse, they get better at seeing one side almost, right? So you either become nearsighted or farsighted. Why is that? Because of the shape of the eye changing?
So actually what happens is with myopia specifically, what happens with myopes is the eye grows too long. So that has to do with like the dopamine and the nitric oxide signaling in the eye. So that's why a main cause of myopia is actually the light environment. Because what happens is the sunlight and like regular light actually causes dopamine release, which stops the growth of the eye. So when you're like under
dopamine release stops the growth of the eye.
Yeah.
Wow.
So when you're under artificial light, you're actually not getting the dopamine that the eye needs, and then that causes like elongation of the eye itself. I definitely think there's like multiple factors in myopia, but light is like a really, really big one. Especially like when you're under a lot of artificial light, it's missing like the violet part of the spectrum. And that part of the spectrum is also really important for dopamine release in the eye. That
is interesting. And myopia is both nearsightedness and farsightedness, correct?
So myopia is just nearsightedness, meaning you can't see far away.
Okay.
Hyperopia is farsightedness, which means you can't see up close.
And myopia is much more common than
hyperopia. Yeah. It's like honestly becoming an epidemic. I think like 50% of the population is myopic at this point, compared to like 20% in the 70s.
Yeah, I think it's pretty insane. I did a post today about braces, and now I'm sure you're aware of this, how everyone needs braces. And I think it also, you would say, it intimately connects to the eye line. It's weird though how these things are literally an epidemic, but because it's just snuck through so slowly that we haven't really paid attention to it, you know?
Yeah, I definitely think, I mean, in optometry, like they're starting to kind of try to slow it, but they're mainly using things like, prescription eye drops. So they use like basically a prescription eye drop that's like a dilute version of pilocarpine. And they actually put that into the eye to slow myopia. And that actually has a direct effect on the ciliary muscle. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of like what happens with the ciliary muscle when you're doing too much near work. The ciliary muscle kind of goes into a spasm where it's contracted for so long so that when you try to look far away again, it doesn't fully contract.
Okay.
So that's why it's important every like 15, 20 minutes you're on the computer to look far away. And that kind of gets the ciliary muscle moving again and doesn't like lock it in that position.
Gotcha. So if you guys see Taylor and I just looking into the space during the podcast, we're getting our 20/20/20 in.
Yeah.
The ciliary muscle, it controls the cilia, right? Which is basically a lens in the eye, kind of open. It's a shutter and how much light it allows in, correct?
So the ciliary muscle, yeah, that controls like how much the lens accommodates. So you can kind of think of it as like the lens kind of has to change shape. So there actually is, this is pretty cool. When you dissect an eye, there's actually a lens inside the eye. And if you take that lens out, you could use it like on paper to like magnify things.
Well, that is wild.
Yeah. So I remember when I saw that, we were dissecting like a pig eye in school, and I thought it was like the coolest thing ever. Like there's actually a lens in your eye that's magnifying things. So the ciliary muscle kind of controls the shape of that.
In your perspective, and I'm going to ask you a bad question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. If there's going to be one cause for this huge myopia epidemic, do you think it's going to be largely nutritional? Like we're eating, let's say, the vegetable oils. Do you think it's because we're staring at our screen all day? Do you think it's because of maybe, let's say 3 categories: nutritional, the actual, distance, and then maybe the third one could be the blue light. Obviously, it's probably some combination of all three. But what do you think is
a lot of it is oxidative stress. And I think with the genetics, it's mainly because the genetics impact growth factors. So insulin-like growth factor is one. So I'm guessing like the mom's blood sugar regulation would really impact kind of like these hormones in the child. So I definitely think, the pregnancy, the mom's health, things like just like genetic toxicity that's passed down, that all impacts the genes through epigenetics. So I definitely think, that's big. When they say like, oh, it's genetic, it's more like, okay, like the mom's choices and people that came before the mom, the ancestors and all that, their choices are affecting the kid. So obviously if the mom's, not eating a healthy diet, that's going to impact the hormones of the child. So that's definitely a factor, just because those hormones are all playing a role in eye growth control of the growth of the eye. So that's why like pathological myopia, which is like having like a -6 or higher prescription, that very much runs in families, they find. But another thing that plays a role is oxidative stress. So we know that hypoxia in the retina leads to myopia. Basically just because you need like good blood flow. And also they found like high polyunsaturated fats are also a cause of oxidative stress. So I definitely think, something like the mom's PUFA intake could, impact the development of myopia in children.
Yeah.
But yeah, to your question, what do I think impacts it the most? It's hard to say. I definitely think it's like a combination of things, like how much natural light they're getting. Are they like reading books all day? Or are they playing outside? And then obviously like the mom's diet and all of that gets passed down. But I think as the things that you can control are mainly just like the light environment and how you're using the eyes, how much near work you're doing, things like that.
So do you think there is an air of truth to, even before phones, that, the reading kids that would likely develop potentially nearsightedness just from constantly reading a book all day?
Yeah, that's definitely a factor. I think they found like just playing outside for like 2 to 3 hours a day decreases myopia by like 50%.
Wow.
So yeah, that's definitely a big, big factor. Like I explained before with the ciliary muscle getting stuck, that definitely impacts the growth of the eye as well.
And then so astigmatism, which is, I actually have astigmatism. I'm also slightly myopic, but basically astigmatism is basic. Oh, you said it has postural origin. So it's from, I guess, one muscle being too tight, but it causes you to see everything kind of like how would you describe it?
Yeah, there's actually something you can look up online. It's called I'm blanking on the name of it, but there's like a little wheel you can look at. It's called like an astigmatism wheel or something. Don't quote me on that. I'm blanking on the name of it.
No problem.
But you can like look up this kind of like wheel thing. And if you look at it, you kind of look at which line is the darkest. And whichever line is the darkest, that's like the angle of your astigmatism. So it's kind of like, think of it like this. It's like the axis out of like a circle, that which you see the best.
Mm.
So yeah, as you were talking about, it does reflect posture. It's kind of like the scoliosis of the eye in a way. Just because when you leave that astigmatism correction in, it reinforces postural imbalances, because the reason it develops is because of the posture. Wow. So basically, it's basically just having like a stronger prescription at just one angle. So for example, it's kind of like having like a weight strapped to one leg. So at some point, your body is going to try to compensate for that somehow. So like, for example, if the signal that's going from like the occipital to the midbrain, which is responsible for vision, if that signal is making your body think that the head is tilted, and the eyes are going to compensate for that by having a shift.
That is crazy. Well, one of the really cool things, and occipital is the eye part of the eye that relates to the back of the brain, correct? The occipital lobe.
Basically, it's like the muscles at the base of the head.
Oh, okay. I was thinking.
So it's like the body posture in the spine sends information to the occipital muscles, and then that sends information to the midbrain about head posture. So if the mind thinks that the head is tilted, the eyes are going to compensate for that. So an example of this would be like, a lot of people don't know this, but they have like a slight vertical misalignment with their eyes. And this is a sign of like head trauma or, having a neck or shoulder injury. Mm. And the eyes will actually compensate for this. And it's good to get that fixed. You can fix that with like PRI or like a little bit of prism in the glasses. And when you fix that, the signal that goes from the eye to the brain is much more efficient. And so that causes like, let's say the person was having headaches or like eye strain, that causes like a huge reduction in that.
That is really fascinating. Yeah. So one of the things, I took a PRI based course and it was really crazy. We had, I took it in two parts. One of the things was in person and they had someone take their glasses off and they measured their mobility. Let's say like they'll do external rotation and let's say they get to like here and then internal rotation here and they put their glasses on and you could see them gain 15, 20, 30 degrees. They didn't do anything different. Just literally putting in a pair of glasses can completely change everything from there on down.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
It's insane.
It's pretty cool how like much, like, because I guess vision, it's kind of like, it can either like lock you up or it can like open up your whole like range of motion, which is pretty cool how powerful that is.
So what is your perspective in that regard? So if you correct your vision, I know they do some like vision therapy in the higher up PRI. How do you correct your vision and to correct your posture? But then, because you want to get back to a 20/20 ideally, right? So like, how do you progress that or regress that?
Are you talking about like, how would you use like something like PRI with glasses to fix the vision?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So honestly, the whole PRI thing, it's still kind of new to me. And I haven't I obviously I see what Alina posts and everything, but I haven't like done it in practice. But from what I've seen, what she does is that she uses the prescription in the glasses. So let's say the prescription in the glasses is totally wrong. Mm-hmm. That's going to make it really hard to fix their body posture. So what she tries to do is she tries to get them in like the right prescription, so that like frees their body up and allows them to like make changes in the posture. So I think it's more of like a dynamic thing where like, as you make changes in the glasses, you're able to change the posture. And then as you're able to change the posture, you probably are able to like gradually lower the glasses prescription. And vision is something that's constantly changing. So like the glasses that you're in probably like before fixing the posture isn't going to be the glasses that like you're always going to need. But what I tell people that are like just starting out and they're not doing like PRI or anything like that, I usually like for people to like gradually lower the prescription. I'm not sure, like, I know that like I usually tell people if the astigmatism isn't big, just like take it out entirely. So let's say it's only like 0.5 astigmatism. or even like 0.75 is still considered low astigmatism. So if you have anywhere from like 0 to 0.75, you could probably just take that out because it's just reinforcing the postural insufficiencies. But again, it's better to like have it tested with someone that can like test the body before just like changing the prescription entirely. But if people are just trying to like DIY it, that's usually what I recommend. Obviously, it would be better if they were working with someone with posture who could test the glasses on them. And then I usually say just like corrected to 20/40, just because there's rarely times in life. I mean, to drive, you only need to be corrected to 20/40. But there's not many times like in life where you really need 20/20 correction. So most people are perfectly fine. Like they're still getting clear images, and like they don't even notice that anything's not as clear as like it could be when they're wearing 20/40. So usually just say, okay, drop it down so that you're seeing 20/40 and wear those for a little bit, and then print out like an eye chart on your own and kind of just like track your progress. Most people do improve like little by little. So then once you're improving in those glasses that you're seeing 20/40 with, and you're getting back down to 20/20 with them, then you could go ahead and drop it again.
So it's kind of like trying to strengthen the eye muscles in that sense?
Yeah. So you're kind of like teaching the eye muscles how to work again, because when you're wearing glasses, it's telling your eye, okay, like we don't have to work, like we don't have to like change our use our focusing muscles anymore, because it's just like, it's just given to you.
And so 20/20 is more of a diagnostic tool than any real kind of rule, right? Because I guess you could have 20/20, but does that mean you're going to have, like, does 20/20 really mean you're going to have perfect vision, or can you still have faulty vision but pass a 20/20 eye test?
There's different things. So like you can have 20/20 vision, but maybe your like contrast sensitivity is off, and that wouldn't be picked up on an eye test. So like visual contrast sensitivity is a good measure of something like mold toxicity or like biotoxin that's going to be affecting the actual cells in the retina, and causing like basically neurodegeneration. So if you have any neurodegeneration, that probably wouldn't be picked up on like a 20/20 eye test. That's something that you would have to do like a visual contrast sensitivity for. And you can actually do that test for free online. It's called like the VCS test. And that's basically just, it can also actually detect nutritional deficiencies as well.
Oh, wow.
Because it looks at like which parts of the contrast sensitivity spectrum you're deficient in. And based off of that, you can actually test for some of the nutritional deficiencies as well.
So what tests do you usually run with your practice? Or not your practice, but your clients?
I just do bioresonance testing, which is done on just like a bioresonance machine. Patient sends in hair and saliva, and we test it against a whole database. So basically that will tell me, nutritional deficiencies, mineral imbalances, if there's any toxins that are impacting the eyes or the body. And then I also test the clients against like certain remedies that might help them.
And what does bioresonance actually mean?
So bioresonance, so everything in the world has like a resonating frequency, so a frequency that it resonates at. So like, for example, the frequency of a parasite, every parasite is going to have a different frequency that it resonates at. The frequency of bacterial toxins or Lyme toxins, everything is going to have a different frequency. So the idea of it is that if you compare the body's internal frequency to that organism, and based off of how the body reacts to that, will tell you whether or not that specific thing is affecting the body.
Oh, that's really
is currently like stressing out the body in a sense.
And that's frequency as in, basically just vibration, right? The frequency at which it's vibrating. Yeah. And is that any different than, the visual light spectrum where the, certain colors vibrate at a certain frequency?
It's a similar concept, I guess.
How does that test actually work? Like if, let's say I sign up for a bioresonance test, like what do I go and do?
So basically you would just send in your hair and saliva. It's done on like a Quest 4 bioresonance machine. And basically you put the hair and saliva on the machine, and then it tests that. You connect that to the computer, and then it tests it against all the different frequencies.
And that you've said before that also allows you to test for kind of like an HTMA, right? It gives you some sort of mineral analysis.
I still like HTMA. I do like HTMA. the difference between this and HTMA is that it'll only bring up like the most pressing deficiencies that are impacting the body at this time. So for a given person, I'll probably see like one or two deficiencies pop up. And those are basically, it kind of works like peeling back layers of an onion. So those are the things that are like most important to work on now.
Okay.
But it's not going to tell you about like every, like HTMA would tell you, okay, this is like every level of every mineral deficiency. I have seen it line up with HTMA. Like, for example, for me, on my HTMA, I have like really high magnesium burn rate and like really low sodium. And when I did bioresonance, it came up magnesium high, which it is high, but it's like just because I'm burning through it quickly. So it's really low. So it's similar to that. And like the person that's doing the test has to know how to interpret it. And then also I came up as like sodium being low, which is the same as what it was on my HTMA. So yeah, I think it just brings up like the most pressing ones, like the things that are like most affecting your body at this time.
The bioresonance mainly gives you nutritional information, right? So like, let's say mold or parasites or the toxicities or deficiencies.
I like it as like a screening tool and like a first test for people to do. Because it just gives you like a really good like overall picture. So it gives you like hormones as well.
Wow.
But it will just pull up like the most like the lowest hormones or like the things that are like most out of balance. So like you'll see like a couple of hormones pop up, a couple of nutritional deficiencies pop up, food sensitivities, amino acid deficiencies. It tells you like which body systems are the most stressed. So basically you just have to like use all of this. I kind of like it because it's kind of like a puzzle where like you're not getting like every single hormone and like every single mineral, but you're kind of getting a really good overall picture and like putting the pieces together of what's going on. And then it also tests against, that I like it because it's customizable. So let's say you really like XYZ supplement, you could test your clients against like that whole supplement line. Which is cool because you can like, so like you can basically see if, let's say like vitamin E, you can basically see if vitamin E will help this person.
Oh, wow.
Or if their bodies resonate or if like the body's imbalances are being fixed by vitamin E, for example.
Do people use bioresonance other than for, what you do in terms of optometry?
Yeah. So I actually I run two types of scans on it. What's cool about it is that you can do like individual scans for like individual organs. So I specifically run the eye scan a lot because a lot of my clients have eye problems, but I can also run like overall full body scans, which tells you like everything, like all the nutritional imbalances. So like sometimes something will come up on a full scan or something will come up in an eye scan, but it didn't come up on the full scan. And that's just because it's affecting the eyes more than is the whole body. So for example, like vitamin C, I see that come up like all the time in eye scans, but it won't always show up on like the full body scan. And that's because the eye actually needs like 4 times the amount of vitamin C that the rest of the body needs. Just because the eye is subject to so much oxidative stress since it has like such a high metabolic rate. So you need a lot more glutathione, you need a lot more vitamin C actually in the vitreous. And that's actually protecting the eye against like everything from like light exposure to just oxidative stress in general.
Yeah, it's also interesting in the regards that like the eye, you said this bunch, but that the eye is literally part of the brain, it's part of the same formation. So it's cool that you get that window into the whole body through the eye.
Yeah, it's really cool. Something that I find really interesting is how like they're finding that you can diagnose Alzheimer's in the eye before it shows up in the brain.
Yeah.
And that's just because the eye is like the only part of the body that you can see into without having to see into the blood vessels without cutting the body open.
So why do you think the eye is the only organ that takes in oxygen from the external environment? Because it does so through the pupil?
Yeah. So it does take like for your cornea to get oxygen, it's mainly just from the outside environment. The back of the eye does have like other ways it gets oxygen, but the cornea specifically can pretty much only get oxygen from the outside environment. And so that's why just like something like wearing contacts causes like hypoxia, because it's a little bit of hypoxia because you're still going to get like, they say like 98, 99% oxygen transmission, depending on what lens you're wearing. But it still is creating a hypoxic condition for the eye because the eye is not getting as much oxygen as it should be getting. So yeah, that's one of the reasons why I don't love contact lenses.
Which brings up a great transition. What are the issues? We'll start with contact lenses. And like, what are the pros as well, just so that people can get a better understanding of them?
The downside is that most of them do block UV light, except the Daily Total One brand. They don't block UV light, which is good. It also kind of alters the surface of the eye. So that alters like how the eye is interacting with light. They found that it changes the eye microbiome. So that does make you kind of like more susceptible to like bacteria, viruses, mold, which the eyes are like always exposed to the environment. So that is one of the downsides. Yeah, I would say the plus sides to contacts is that if you have like a really high prescription, glasses kind of interfere with the peripheral vision. So it does give you better peripheral vision than glasses. And then the other downside is that you can't take them off the eye. So like when you're wearing glasses, it's pretty cool because like, let's say you're doing year work and you don't have a super high prescription, you can just like take the glasses off entirely. And that's much more relaxing for your eyes, and it's not going to give you like eye strain and cause like an increase in your myopia.
Okay, cool.
So I really think it depends, on the person. And if someone's like wearing contacts all day, and they're a low myope, I definitely think it's better to wear, glasses, because then you can take them off when you're doing your work.
I try to only wear them when I'm doing like a sport and I need to be able to see on a
that makes sense. Yeah. I personally only wear contacts when I'm skiing.
There you go. That's what I wear.
That's like, yeah, when I'm skiing, I feel like it's worth it. And like, you're not like habitually wearing them. I definitely think for like sports, or maybe you have like an event that you want to go to and don't want to wear glasses. I think they're really good for that.
Glasses are cool looking now.
Yeah.
What are the downsides to glasses?
So with glasses, a lot of the downside to it is that there's an optical center in every pair of glasses, right? So that optical center is the only point on the glasses where you have perfectly clear vision. So if you look away from that optical center, you might experience some distortion. So in that sense, glasses are kind of like visual confinement because they kind of train your eye to only look through that one point on the glasses, especially something like progressive lenses, where you could only see at a certain distance when you're looking through that part of the lens, because how progressives or bifocals work is they have different prescription depending on where you look in the glass. So that kind of restricts the eye movement, and the eye movement is super important for like brain processing. So you'll notice when you ask like anyone a question, for example, their eyes kind of like move in different ways. So like, let's say you're like to someone like, oh, what's your birthday? They might kind of look up and to the right when they're thinking. So eye movements are actually a way that we like process information.
That's really cool.
Especially like emotional things like that as well. So in that sense, if you're like confining the eyes to not moving in a natural way, you're also kind of putting like constraints on like brain, on like thinking and processing and all that.
I think I heard you mention this actually this morning. Was it the non-rapid eye movement sensitization or non-rapid eye movement?
Yeah.
That's basically they just like kind of make you look around, right? And it helps to allow you to release certain, like get out of into the parasympathetic state. Yeah.
So I haven't actually done EMDR. But it stands for like eye movement desensitization reprocessing, I think. So basically that's a way to like release traumas by like looking at the eye movements. Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, it is crazy. I heard Bessel van der Kolk mention it in his book. He said he found
Yeah,
it very
a lot of
useful.
people like swear by it. I think it works by kind of like distancing you from the trauma.
Mm.
So it makes it allows you to like look at it from afar and kind of like not associate yourself with it as much.
Interesting. I would have thought that it would be more so related to helping you to process the trauma in your head, I guess, while you're taking out of the sympathetic state, because it's forcing you into like a more of a parasympathetic state by looking all around.
Yeah, that's also probably part of it as well, because I know when you get into like fight or flight, you're just focused on your central vision and you lose the periphery. So another way to kind of like retrain the nervous system and get back into like a parasympathetic state is actually to like learn how to like use your peripheral vision again, because most people just like are so overly focused on central vision because that's what we need for survival.
Mm.
So I like this technique. It's called open focus, but it's kind of like a different way of looking at the world where you're like inviting the periphery in and you're not too heavily focused on the central. And this actually like gets your nervous system to like calm down. So that's a pretty cool technique I like.
What is the technique?
It's called open focus.
Oh, okay. And
it's basically just like inviting the periphery into your field of vision. So instead, like when you're like looking at a house, for example, you're not paying attention to what's directly in front of you. You're paying attention to what's on the side of you.
Interesting. Do you think that glasses, in that respect, can force you more into the sympathetic because it's forcing you to look forward, and it's kind of, I would imagine, it's kind of blocking your periphery, right?
Yeah. So glasses do block peripheral vision. That's a downside as well. So yeah, they can kind of like make you more in like a sympathetic state just because you're not able to see the periphery as well. Same thing with like hats also.
Oh, really?
I know Alina was talking about that today. She was saying how like hats, I mean, ones like this, they cut off your peripheral vision. So she doesn't like them from like a movement perspective.
Do you test people for how they look through their periphery? Is there a way to do that? Or you kind of just assume that everyone's just dominating through the central vision?
I think if you're perceptive, you can pretty much tell. Like if you practice open focus, for example, you can pretty much tell like if you're only focusing on your central, because you can like physically notice a very big difference like when you switch. So yeah, that's one way to tell. And then you can also just do a visual field test. So a lot of myopes have visual field defects. And I do see visual field defects come up on bioresonance scans from time to time. So whenever I see visual field defects come up, I just know that, they're in fight or flight because they're not like inviting the periphery in. But yeah, mostly it is common in myopes to have like actually like a peripheral visual field defect that they wouldn't even notice.
Can you elaborate on like what a peripheral vision defect would be, or a visual defect would be?
So if you can actually test your own peripheral vision. So if you have like a finger like this and you're kind of just like bringing it towards your eye, your visual field, you'll notice it come in. There's like a point where like you finally see it. That's how we like test. That's like a kind of like a poor man's visual field test.
And that's, you'd be because like looking straight though, but like having it over here.
Yeah, like you're looking straight and you're bringing the finger in from the periphery.
Interesting. Yes.
And then you'll see it at some point.
And then how close it gets is a good sense of, I guess you could measure like a foot away would be some kind of measurable test.
It would mainly be like the angle. So I think it's like every part of the visual field has a different, like, I think it's like 100 degrees when it's like this way, or like, I don't know, I forgot the exact numbers, but like, I think from the top, it's like you have 100 degrees, or there's different like degrees that you have on like each side of the visual field.
Very interesting.
But you wouldn't be able to like get a good sense if you're doing it on yourself. You would actually probably have someone have to do it for you. Basically, you would like cover one eye and they would like slowly like bring the fingers down. And you would say like, okay, I see it. Okay, I see it. So that's like a way that like your eye doctor screens for visual field. But if you really want to get a good sense of the visual field, you do have to do like a visual field test at like an eye doctor's office.
Gotcha. Might have to look into that. I'm a huge klutz.
And basically that's just like pressing a button when you see a black dot.
Oh, really?
But it's like all automated.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm a huge klutz, so I think my periphery might be a little messed up.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the only way to tell would just be to get a visual field test on an eye doctor. You would probably have to have the right chief complaint if you want that covered by insurance.
Good to know.
You'd probably have to be like, oh, my peripheral vision
keep walking into walls.
Oh, really?
No, I'm just joking.
That's not good.
No, usually I'm more of a trip on a cord that I'm not paying attention to, but I'm always very animated. So I'm usually pretty focused on something else, but maybe that's because I'm sympathetic dominant.
Got it. Okay.
Hopefully not though. I'm pretty chill, I think.
Hopefully not.
Back to, so at a postural question. So I know we have, I actually know this from shooting guns. It's the only reason I learned that we all have a eye dominance.
Yeah.
And so the way you can tell, the way I learned is like you put a triangle with your hands and focus on an object and whichever eye you bring it back to. So I'm left eye dominant, which sucks because I'm a righty.
Yeah.
How do you use that test frequently? Is it useful to you? And then second part, do you find that in regards to the dominance, do people typically have better vision in their dominant eye compared to their non-dominant eye?
Yeah, for sure. I'm right eye dominant. And yeah, you can do that test where like you center something in the triangle and then you bring it towards your eye. And whichever side you go toward is like your dominant eye. But you have to like kind of do it without thinking about it or else you can kind of mess up the results. But yeah, I'm like super right eye dominant and my right eye does have better vision. So yeah, I definitely think that's true. Like whatever eye you're kind of dominant in, you tend to have better vision in it because you rely on it more. So anything that you rely on more, you're strengthening the neural pathways and you're going to develop them better. So yeah, I definitely notice that with people. Like if you're right eye dominant, you definitely most likely have better vision in your right eye. And most people that are right eye dominant actually use their right hand.
Really? That's interesting. I'm righty.
So yeah, most people are right eye dominant. Yeah.
Interesting. Do you have people work on their left eye more then, or their non-dominant eye?
I'm sure like that would kind of be similar concept to like, you know, they say like brush your teeth with your non-dominant hand because that strengthens like new neural pathways. So I definitely think, yeah, if you put like an eye patch on your right eye for part of the day, that might actually help strengthen the left eye. That's actually what they do when like kids have like amblyopia or something. They do patching. So they'll actually like patch the good eye so that they can like make the bad eye work harder. Because what happens is if you have amblyopia, and that basically means like you can't get to 20/20 in one of your eyes. So let's say that like your left eye is amblyopic and that eye is like 20/40, for example. It can't get to 20/20. You would patch the good eye for like 2 hours a day, for example. And that would kind of force the bad eye to work. And when you're forcing the bad eye to work harder, that strengthens it and helps you form like new like neural connections.
And then last but not least, in terms of the eyewear, what's the issue with sunglasses?
Yeah, sunglasses is interesting. It's a big like hot topic right now. Everyone's like, you know, sunglasses, they're not good for you, blah, blah, blah. But I think that there's definitely some benefit in certain situations, what I've come to realize. But like, for example, like in the morning when you're out trying to get morning sun, that's when it's like super important not to wear them. But if you're like on a beach on a hot summer day and your like skin is at risk of getting burned, there might be some times when like you could argue that there's more benefit compared to like detriment. So I definitely think wearing them all the time for majority of people is not a good idea, just because what happens is when your UV light actually helps the eye generate oxygen, and UV light has a big impact on easy water creation in the eye. And the eye is like 80% water, but it's not just like any type of water. It's like gel water. So that's like the fourth phase of water, if you ever looked into that, where it's like, yeah. So basically, you need UV light to keep that water like in its gel state. And actually, when it starts to break down and it starts to get less easy and more liquid, that's when people start to get floaters, things like that.
Wow. For the listeners, the easy water, it's like you're talking about Gerald Pollack's work, right? And basically it's like the egg yolk, or is a way I describe it. It's basically how all the water, it's water, but it all sticks together. And that's because largely from the energy production, everything binding the proteins together to form this gel-like material that is the essence of life in and of itself, I would say, in my opinion.
Yeah, pretty much.
And it's really interesting that so that's probably why the eye is such a good sign for other parts of your health, right? Because it's so energy dependent, even compared to a lot of other organs.
So the eye actually needs like so much more energy. It has like so many more mitochondria. There's actually specialized mitochondria in the lens, actually. So I've heard from people that like when they stopped wearing sunglasses, they started getting more natural light, they didn't need reading glasses anymore.
Really?
Because they were actually strengthening the mitochondria in the lens of their eye by getting more natural light and getting more UV light into the eye. So that actually like helped their vision a lot. And they were like in their 60s and they didn't need reading glasses, which is pretty cool.
That is cool.
Because your age at which you start to need reading glasses actually predicts longevity. So most people start to kind of need reading glasses at the age of like 40 or so. Just because their mitochondria is just in decline.
That's a crazy.
So the longer that you can delay the need for reading glasses, the longer you're pretty much going to live, which is pretty cool.
That is awesome. So
yeah, the natural light is like a big factor in that, because they've actually found that the lens in the eye has specialized mitochondria.
Why? What are they different from regular mitochondria? Do you know?
It doesn't differ in any way from regular mitochondria. It's just cool that the eye have like specialized mitochondria. It's basically described in this one article as like you have like tiny lenses, like the mitochondria function as like tiny lenses in the eye.
Oh, wow. There's
a really cool article on it I could send you later.
I would love that. So is there any truth to, I guess you were saying there is a little bit of truth to what I haven't asked yet, to the sun causing, ocular melanoma, or like what is there a level of light that we shouldn't exceed, or should we generally be trying to kind of build a callus so you can, don't wear sunglasses all the time so you can go into relatively bright lights?
So I think it's the same thing with like the sunscreen debate. There's people that are like, never wear sunscreen ever, like whatever. I personally am under the belief that like you should never want to burn your skin. And it's the same thing with the eyes. Like you never want to burn the eyes. So I would personally only wear sunscreen in certain situations. Like if, let's say I was like, I'm used to like the sun in New York, which is like not strong at all. Let's say I went on vacation to Mexico. I would have to kind of like build up a solar callus. So like while I was building up a solar callus, I would use like a more natural sunscreen that has like zinc oxide or something like that, and not like all the chemicals. And just kind of use that until you like build up a base, and like slowly, like depending on where you are, and also your skin tone depends a lot about that. So like personally, I have fair skin, so I can't just like go to the tropics and like not wear sunscreen. If I was like in New York for like the entire year and not like building up to that. So I think it's the same thing with sunglasses. I also think like you can have like a better sunglass. So the problem with sunglasses is that it heavily distorts the light spectrum, and you're just cutting out the UV, and you need the UV light to produce melanin in the skin, and also like melanin production in the eyes. So basically, what happens is you're going to be more likely to get a burn, also because the pupil is not going to constrict as much. And so that's actually letting more light in, which is what you don't want to do. So that's another problem with it. So I think a moderate version, like I kind of wish they made these, but if someone made like sunglasses that only block 50% of the UV light, the problem is they all block 100%. So you'd want them to block 50% of the UV light and then have a neutral gray tint that blocks 50% of the visible light. That way it's more of an even spectrum. So the gray tint would block like all the parts of the visible light spectrum. So that way it could be like a more like moderate version of sunglasses where it's not just like totally cutting out all UV light and heavily distorting the visual spectrum.
Let's say theoretically, you and I are relatively fair skinned. I've actually noticed and I completely agree with you on the pretty much everything you said. I'll use coconut oil, but I'm generally just a fan of saying tan, try not to burn, basically. Do you think there's any, let's say maybe you don't have blue eyes like we do, or you have darker eyes. Is there a point that we can all adapt to? You think that, let's say we go live in the tropics for the next 10 years, that will be fine without sunglasses? Or do you think we'll probably always need a little bit of protection sometimes, maybe at peak sun?
I think, yeah, that's a hard question. I feel like just the fact that people with dark eyes have so much more melanin is like super protective, right? So there is like a low level of melanin synthesis in the adult human eye, but it's probably not enough to like grant you the same amount of protection that like someone with like dark eyes or dark skin has. So yeah, I mean, that's a tough question, but I would say probably not, just based off like genetics and like how much innate protection you have. Because the more innate protection you have from the sun depends largely on your genetics, and largely like where, you're supposed to be living based off, your genetics. So yeah, I think that everyone is going to need everyone is going to have a different sweet spot for like the amount of sun that they need. And people with darker skin obviously have much, much higher demands. So I think it really just depends on the person and like what their sweet spot is. And so that's hard to like say like, okay, every person with light skin needs X amount of sun. Yeah.
So on the flip side, do you think blue eyes and maybe green as well are an evolutionary adaptation akin to paler skin to allow more UV light in higher latitudes?
Yeah, pretty much.
That's cool.
That's how it works. And it's interesting because people with light skin and light eyes, they're so much more prone to like macular degeneration. And like one of the recommendations, how like UV light spreads lipofuscin skin? You
mean blue light or UV light completely?
UV light actually spreads lipofuscin. So I think, they tell people with macular degeneration, like always wear sunglasses, for example. And that's because they're just genetically not supposed to get as much sun. It doesn't mean that like they don't need UV light. It just means that they need less of it, right? So in a way, when you have like a buildup of polyunsaturated fatty acids, because they get that buildup in part because they don't have as much melanin. Because melanin, what it does is it kind of protects against iron-induced oxidative stress and heavy metal-induced oxidative stress. So the heavy metals combine with oxygen, PUFA, and estrogen. And when all those things combine, and then the UV light spreads that. So the UV light definitely plays a role, but it's about having like the right amount of it and not like overdoing it.
Because it's almost like melanin and lipofuscin in some sense are the opposite sides of the same coin, right? They're both kind of electron sinks trying to absorb energy, but one is like, I guess our ability, the lipofuscin is bad because it's an overboard mechanism. We can't absorb enough. And the melanin is a protective mechanism to allow us to absorb more, the callus, you'd say.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So really interesting. For us blue-eyed folk, what do you recommend? What's your protocol for, not getting too much UV?
I basically go on like my skin, like however your skin's reacting is going to tell you a lot about how your eyes are going to be reacting. Yeah. So like if I'm out at the beach, I mean, I know it's hard to like figure out like, am I going to burn from this? Am I not? But if I'm out at the beach and I see I'm getting too much color, that would probably just be my point where I would just like leave. Like I wouldn't try to like overexpose myself. But yeah, there's no like one protocol that I would say like, this is exactly like when you need to wear sunglasses. I mean, you don't. I think you just have to have like good judgment, look at how your skin's reacting and things like that. And always I mean, if I'm at the beach, I'm usually always like wearing a hat or like a wide brim hat or something like that when I'm not wearing sunglasses. Just because I do like to like protect my face a little bit more from the sun. So yeah, that's typically what I'll do is like, let's say I'm at the beach, I'll probably only go for like a couple of hours. And I also look at like the D-Minder app. I don't know if you had that app, but based off like how much like vitamin D I'm getting, I can also tell like, okay, this is like enough for me.
Gotcha.
Pretty much like I got enough vitamin D for the day. I don't need to like bake in the sun all day.
Would you assume that would also increase as well, like over time as you get more tan and all of a sudden you'd have less of an issue spending more time at the beach?
Yeah, that's pretty much how it works. So you can like build up a tolerance to the sun as well.
And even
like end of the summer, you're not going to have, I personally don't like burn if it's like the end of the summer and I already have like a pretty good base tan.
Yeah. I find myself that since like becoming a peter and getting more saturated fat, I burn a lot less easily too and tan much more easily.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Definitely notice like they say like take vitamin E before you go out in the sun. I even think like something like chaga, which has a lot of melanin, that can also protect you from the sun. I think like Ray Pete says like aspirin too, right?
Yeah. Niacinamide as well, I believe.
Niacinamide. And then also red light therapy. So if you like do red light therapy before you go out in the sun, that can be protective as well.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to ask you a couple questions about that. But I was just going to ask. So even though we're blue-eyed individuals, don't have a lot of melanin in our eyes, is there still a degree of melanin and that probably increases as well? You just can't really see it as much compared to a darker-eyed individual?
So there is from what I've read, there's a low level of melanin synthesis. So you can like make more melanin.
Okay.
So it's like everyone has the same, I think, number of melanocytes, but how much melanin they make is what's different.
Oh, interesting.
Between like blue and brown eyes.
And so I heard you say this, and I think, not to pit anyone against each other, I think Huberman said the opposite. So Huberman said we don't have any photoreceptors in our skin. I thought I heard you a while back say the opposite. Really? Yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah. So we actually do have photoreceptors in the skin. We just don't know as much about them, if that makes sense. So it's hard to say, like, we have photoreceptors in the skin and the eyes, but we obviously have way more in the eyes.
Yeah.
So that's why, like, there's this whole debate about, like, how sunglasses, like, prevent. This is what I'm not sure about, actually. So they say, like, if you're wearing sunglasses, you're not going to produce as much vitamin D, for example, because you need you need sunlight in the eyes to produce, to secrete melanocyte stimulating hormone, which secretes melanin. So the question is like, is there enough photoreceptors on the skin to actually, because photoreceptors on the skin also have to do with how much vitamin D you produce as well. So since you have so many more, like, receptors in the eye, photoreceptors in the eye, wouldn't you think that would play a much bigger role in vitamin D production than the ones that are on the skin?
Yeah.
To answer that question, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
So it's like, how much would it affect vitamin D production is the question. I know it definitely does affect it just because you have so many more photoreceptors in the eye. But you also do have them on the skin as well.
I always thought that vitamin D production was mostly from activating the cholesterol pathway. So like the sun kind of activated the cholesterol pathway, but maybe I'm confusing that with something else. I'm sure
it does. That is another aspect of it too.
Okay. So
the skin does play a big role as well, but it's like the question is like, how much do the eyes play a role in that?
Do you think the sunglasses could also inhibit your ability to produce the melanins, the MSH, melanocyte stimulating hormone, which could interfere with your, what is it?
With production of vitamin D.
I was thinking with melanin too, though. Would that also interfere with your tan potentially?
Yeah, so that would interfere with like how much melanin the skin is producing.
Okay. In terms of, so one of the practices that I really think is interesting in terms of the like sunblock argument is that a lot of the like tribes, the tropical tribes back in the day would use coconut oil, which I think is really interesting because you're also going to topically absorb a lot of that saturated fat. So in general, what are your thoughts on the unsaturated fats versus the saturated fats for eye health?
So I'm kind of under the belief that everyone has a different kind of like amount that they need. And I think it also depends on like your genetics. So they've actually found, I think, that like darker skinned individual, I think, would need more than lighter skinned individual or can tolerate more. Yeah. But lighter skinned individual, I think, have a harder time with the PUFAs.
Interesting. I would have thought it was the opposite.
I don't know. I think they've actually found that like African descent convert PUFAs better. Like they more efficiently convert PUFAs to long chain PUFAs. And then the long chain PUFAs get converted into like the messengers.
Okay, those hormones.
Yeah, so basically my thoughts on it are that some people, depending on where you're from, are going to need more. Some people are going to need less based on genetics. There's actually like a specific gene. What is that gene? I think I have it written down somewhere. But I recently worked, it's interesting you bring this up because I recently worked with a client that has Beatty's crystalline dystrophy. And this is actually an overload. It's like a PUFA overload in the mitochondria that causes this person with this disease to lose vision. And the reason they lose vision is because they have a mutation in this gene. And this is the gene that helps convert PUFAs. So because they have this gene mutation, they literally can't convert PUFAs into like usable energy. So it builds up as like these crystals in the retina. And that makes their vision decline. So anyway, that's why I say I think there is a big genetic component. Like if someone has like a gene mutation and they can't use that fatty acid for fuel, then it's just going to build up in the retina.
Is that similar to lipofuscin?
But what was interesting is very similar. So it's basically like, what I realized with this person is like, this person shouldn't have like should have like as little PUFAs in their diet as possible because of this genetic mutation. But you would never know they had this genetic mutation if they weren't losing their vision. The reason is because this gene is heavily expressed in the retina. So even though this gene affects like different parts of the body, like the brain, the lungs, the liver, they're not going to be like having problems in those organs, which is super interesting because those organs have like other mechanisms, I guess. Wow. But the retina doesn't. So I found that like condition just like super interesting. And it's a really rare condition. It's like an autosomal recessive progressive retinal disease. But that just like made me realize like how much I think genetics play a role in how people process like different fatty acids. And the interesting part was that on that person's scan, they came up as low in ALA, which is a fatty acid. And like, if someone's looking at that, they could be like, oh, like if you don't know like anything about their history, you could be like, oh, this person needs more, like this person needs more of this, but it's actually the opposite because if they have more of it, it's just going to build up more because they just literally can't process it.
That's one of the things I'd like to dive into more of the hair tissue mineral analysis and maybe bioresonance. I think it's those tests are diagnostic tools are so interesting, so useful.
Yeah, it's super interesting how that comes up for people. And then I was also just like asking her like, yeah, like how's your like fat digestion and all that? Like, do you experience like floating stools and do you have high triglycerides specifically? And she was like, yeah, I have high triglycerides. And those are like some signs that like you're not metabolizing fat properly.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So high triglycerides, things like floating stools.
Free fatty acids as well?
Yeah, that would be another one that would indicate something like that on blood work. But yeah, I was like, yeah. And this person's taking like cod liver oil, I think. I was like, no.
Maybe not for you.
Maybe not for you, yeah.
Speaking of slightly unsaturated, I think they're fatty acids, almost technically. What are your thoughts on the carotenoids? I know everyone's talking about them. The carrot a day for eye health, I think that was kind of propaganda from World War II. But the like, astaxanthin and the lutein and I forget what the third one is. But
zeaxanthin. And
Zeaxanthin.
the scary part about those is that they're putting like weird iterations of them. Like they're putting like mesoxanthin in supplements now. And that's one that's like barely found in the retina. Like they found it in the retina, but it's not even one that you can like get from food. So it's like a metabolite that's like made, but like, how do you know if that's good or bad?
Yeah.
So it's like really sketchy. I don't know. I personally wouldn't supplement with them. I think like even like getting them from egg yolks is fine. Like if anything, I would just like work on strengthening melanin, because that's gonna be more protective than the carotenoids anyway.
I think one of the most interesting things I've heard you say in my research was that the whole point of consuming the carotenoids is that you want it to convert to retinol, to the retinoids, I guess, retinoic acid. So why do they not recommend just eating more? Why does the mainstream eye health say, oh, let's slam these carotenoids instead of the actual product?
It doesn't really make sense, especially because like if you're getting too many carotenoids, it can like suppress thyroid function,
which will suppress the conversion, right?
Yeah. So it depends a lot on like the health of your liver, and a lot of people don't have healthy enough livers to convert. So like if you can't do the conversion, I think those things, especially combined with blue light, it's just going to create oxidative stress.
Wow. Yeah.
So I wouldn't have it be like main focus.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, like also in order for vitamin A to get to the eye, something needs to happen in the liver, and zinc is super important for that. So if you're getting too much of the carotenoids and you're just like driving down your liver function, you're not going to be able to get as much usable vitamin A to the eye as well.
Good to know.
So it's going to like also prevent you from like using like the vitamin A that you do have.
That makes sense. Yeah, I think that's so interesting. People just love to, and I'm not trying to be negative, but I don't know, I think sometimes like the really cool names, like the astaxanthin, people are like, oh, like this is great. Astaxanthin. Sorry. Thank you. This is so cool. It'll help my eye health. Like all the like BPC 157. It just sounds, magical, and people just gravitate towards these things instead of beef liver.
Like you want like something that your body can actually use, and not something that's going to be like, okay, it's there in small amounts. Like in small amounts, it's helpful. And like when you're getting it from food, but if you're trying to supplement it, it's really risky in my opinion, because these are like high amounts of these things. And like, we're only getting like very small amounts from food. So
that makes sense. I think that's great 2 cents to have. So nutritionally or supplementally, what are your big things for your clients that you try? I mean, obviously it's going to be N of 1, a little different person to person, but in general, what are your guidelines?
Like the most common deficiencies I see for the eye specifically, I see a lot of low vitamin C specifically. That one comes up quite a bit. I see calcium coming up quite a bit, either low or high. Iron tends to come up sometimes. Copper comes up quite a bit, I would say. But yeah, it's really like so bio individual. But yeah, vitamin C is the main one. I think that's probably the one I see the most, vitamin C being low.
What about vitamin E?
People just needing more of that. I don't see that one coming up too much, actually, surprisingly.
I wonder if that one's not as active in the eyes because it's so watery compared to some of the other tissues that have a lot more fat, since it's fat soluble.
I know that that's probably true. I know that the main antioxidants in the eye are vitamin C and glutathione, which
is a precursor to vitamin C, I think, right?
Mm-hmm. I know a lot of people I see a lot of people resonate with like taurine eye drops. Which is not surprising because taurine is like so important for eye health. Also the liver.
Yeah.
And the eyes are like so interconnected with the liver. Magnesium. I see magnesium coming up a ton.
Okay. When do you?
And I think it's because like when you don't have enough magnesium, the blood vessels can't relax enough. Oh, and I see zinc coming up a lot too. So I think because like the blood vessels aren't relaxed enough, you can't get as much like blood flow and nutrition to the eye.
When do you recommend let's say taurine or just in general, a supplemental eye drop versus a food supplement?
For my clients, I mainly just look at like what they're resonating with. It also depends on like how old you are, because I know like taurine like really declines with age. So like if you're like young and healthy, it's probably not necessary. I think it just like depends on the person, what they're gonna need. But yeah, I basically just go on like, if they're resonating with it, I recommend it for them.
Resonating as in feeling good, or as in bioresonance?
In the like on the testing that I do.
Okay.
Yeah. So if it comes up for them as like it's balancing them out, I usually do recommend it. But I do see like taurine come up on full scans as well, and I think like a magnesium taurate supplement can be really good.
Why would you go for eye drops versus like a supplement though?
Oh, so if they're specifically having eye problems, and that's when I would go for the eye drop.
Okay.
If you're not specifically having eye problems, I wouldn't bother with it. I would just do like oral.
And let's say you see someone with a liver issue and they need more taurine. Do you ever see that also just benefit their eye out of just the relation between the two?
You can like help the eyes by doing oral too. By doing the eye drop, it's just like a better delivery method, like straight to the eye, pretty much.
That makes sense.
So yeah.
What are the most connected?
Also,
go on.
Also, I think with eye drops, it's better for like targeting the central nervous system. It's the same thing with like glutathione. Like if you do like a glutathione nasal spray, that's going to be better for the eyes than like taking it orally.
Okay.
Just because that's going to have more of an effect on the central nervous system.
Right.
So I think just like nasal sprays are also a better way to target the eyes as well.
Just because it's going straight through the brain, you think, and just closer?
Just because it's getting like absorbed. Yeah, it's getting absorbed. Like it's going to go more to the brain and the eyes. Like for example, like nebulizing, like I've nebulized like methylene blue, for example. And that has like a way more effect on me than like taking it orally. In terms of like it actually brought my smell back after I had the C word.
I might have to try that. I haven't really gotten my smell back. It's been a while.
Oh, seriously?
It's not, I can smell, but it's not as strong as it used to be.
Not as strong, yeah. It was crazy. Like, I think I nebulized it like 2 or 3 times. Or maybe it was like the second time I nebulized it. Like, and my smell came back right after that.
Wow. Nebulizing means putting it, it's like you breathe it, right?
Yeah, you're breathing it in, yeah.
Okay.
So that's just going to target the central nervous system better.
What are the most common organs you see connected with eyes? Obviously everything,
definitely liver and gallbladder, definitely. And then just like if ever like the HPA axis is coming up, like hypothalamus, pituitary, adrenals, just like if someone's under a ton of stress, that's usually going to be affecting the eyes, because the eyes are actually one of the first organs to start degenerating. So it's actually one of the first places that we see aging in the body. So just people that are under a ton of stress, that's usually something that definitely affects the eyes, especially because the eyes are so sensitive to changes in cortisol. There's actually an eye condition from high cortisol that causes like swelling in the macula. So like fluid basically accumulates in the macula. And it's mainly typically seen in like high stress males. And it has to do with like the male hormones and how that's like interacting with cortisol. Wow. So that's why that one it's called central serous retinopathy. And usually what happens is like, they come in, their vision's down. You take like a scan of the macula and you just see like swelling there. And it's like there's just like an increase in fluid in the macular area. And then it usually goes down in like a month or 2. But what happens is this can also be steroid induced, because we know like what steroids do to cortisol and blood sugar. So if it's steroid induced, it's harder to reverse than if it's like stress induced.
Yeah, it's interesting hearing so much about the holistic approach and how so much is connected. Like it's almost crazy to think. I guarantee there's some connections that we probably just haven't seen in the literature yet between reproductive health, because typically that's one of the first things to fail, and ocular health that are probably so interrelated that we can either see through the eyes or things like that. There's
a lot of changes that actually happen to the eyes during pregnancy.
Oh, really?
Like yeah, like people's prescriptions like totally change, and then they go back to normal once they give birth.
in a
And
beneficial
then
way usually?
it just changes. Like sometimes they'll get more myopic just because like the hormones impact the vision so much. Like the estrogen, the progesterone, all of that impacts vision so much. So yeah, a lot of pregnant ladies have changes in the eyes like while they're pregnant, but then like once they give birth, it goes back to how it was before.
Pregnant women and giving birth is like one of the craziest postural changes too. They talk about that a lot of PRI. They go from basically a lot of like the very skinny, they call them narrows in the eye said, like the very little rib cage flare to wide. It's like a power lifter, and then they go back to being a narrow just after giving birth.
Yeah, it's crazy how many changes like the body goes under.
Yeah. So what are the worst habits that you see people doing for ocular health, eye health?
Yeah. So squinting, staring. So a lot of people have like a tendency to like not blink and not move their eyes at all and just like stare straight ahead. That just causes like stress in the eyes and also in the brain. Mm-hmm. Also just like clenching. So a lot of people like unconsciously like clench their jaw. They unconsciously clench the pelvic floor. They also do this with their eyes. So like even like when people like right before you go to sleep, a lot of people like when they just close their eyes to go to sleep, they're like still like squeezing them shut instead of just like gently closing them. Mm. So if you're one of those people that like you're going to bed and you notice that you're like squeezing your eyes, that's a good sign that you're like constantly just like straining your eyes all day and you're just like holding a lot of tension there. So one of the things I like to recommend, it's called palming. It's basically just like, you're not pressing on the eyes with your hands, but you're like gently cupping your hands over your eyes. It's just kind of like relaxing for the eye muscles. It just like signals for the eyes to relax. And when you're doing this, you should kind of like let the eyes move around. Like don't like force the eyes to like look straight ahead. Just let them kind of like wander around and just like move around. Because I think a lot of people kind of forget that like their eyes, like healthy eyes, are constantly moving. Yeah. They're never like staying in one spot.
So I like to read outside a lot, and sometimes I'll work outside of my laptop. Do you think that's one of the cases where you might be better off wearing sunglasses so you're not squinting from all the sunlight?
Yeah, you can even get a tint on your computer. Like if you tint the screen a certain color, it kind of acts as sunglasses.
In terms of
like I have this app on my computer. What is it called?
Flux.
I forgot what it's called, but there's this app and it can actually put like a filter over your screen that's kind of like acting like sunglasses.
Oh, really?
So you can see the screen better when you're out in the sun.
I have an app. I didn't know that you could do that.
I personally just use a hat, and I'm usually okay just using a hat and then doing a tint over the screen.
Okay.
I think it's like a yellowish tint that helps.
Sometimes I feel, and I was curious about this, I feel like my vision generally gets better maybe in the summer a little bit, but after I come out from sitting outside looking at my computer, I don't know if it's the glare or something, but everything just it just seems off for a while afterwards.
Yeah, I think it's also just because like your photoreceptors, it's actually good for your eyes, I think, to go from dark to light quickly, because that stimulates like lymphatic drainage and blood flow. So I just think like the changes in stimulation to your photoreceptors, there's this thing called like bleaching the photoreceptors. It's basically like when you expose the eye to like a ton of light, it can kind of like bleach out some of your photoreceptors a little bit. So I think that's why like when you're going from light to dark, it might take a little while to like for your photoreceptors to kind of like readjust.
So it's probably a good thing then in that case. It's not necessarily a bad thing.
It's not necessarily a bad thing. I think it's just your eyes are adjusting to different light environments.
Interesting. That makes a lot of sense.
And maybe your photoreceptors are like a little bit like more bleached out. And so some of them are just like coming back from that.
So I was thinking about getting I don't know if you know Gemba Red. They're a pretty cool company. They sell red lights, and they have one that's for your desk. Do you think that would be a good practice? Just have it next to your computer. Also could have it in your periphery, so you're looking at that and getting it in indirectly.
Yeah, I don't see why not. I personally use red light therapy. So yeah, I definitely think it's beneficial to have like some red light there to balance out the blue light spectrum. That makes sense to me. I know there's like all these kind of like fancy lights now that are like trying to like reproduce the sunlight when you're indoors. I've seen those. Like, I think one of them's called like Sky Portal or something like that.
And that's in terms
But
of
it's basically
sunset?
like, no, it's basically a light that tries to like recreate what it would be like to be a natural light inside.
That makes
so
sense.
that like if you're working on your computer, you could still be getting the benefits of like natural light
Oh, that's pretty cool.
by using like that. Yeah. It's called like Sky Portal or something like that.
We have a pretty healthy office, so maybe I'll be able to convince get some new light bulbs.
Yeah, that would be a good idea. Why not? Yeah, I think that's like the biggest downside to working in an office, right? Is that like you can't control like what kind of light you're exposed to there. I mean, you can wear blue light blockers, but
Yeah.
you're still getting like a good amount of flicker, which is like stressful on the brain, and your skin's still getting.
Luckily, we have huge windows on the side, so we don't even use the lights a lot of time, just because there's so much natural light.
Oh, that's super nice.
But 2 questions. Is there any issue with looking into the red light directly, do you think?
There's mixed things on that, I feel like. I know Denver Red, they've come out with something all about that. Just like about like, is it okay for your eyes to get red light and all that? Personally, I usually tell people to just like have their eyes closed and not stare straight into it. I think that's just like safer, since I feel like we don't exactly know yet. So yeah, especially I think there's some like controversy with like specifically the infrared light.
Okay.
There's maybe some studies saying like the infrared light, too much for the eyes isn't good. So yeah, personally, I just close my eyes
Gotcha.
when I look at it. I don't like keep my eyes open when I do red light therapy.
And then I know that windows block a lot of the natural, like the full spectrum lights. It's all not going in. I heard you mention that obviously it's really important to get outside and get natural sunlight. But I heard you mention that even just cracking your window, like in a car, or just having it slightly open, makes a big difference. Is that just from like the light getting in indirectly, or what is that from?
Probably just because you're getting like, because the car windows, they block UV light. So you're getting just like a more balanced spectrum. You're getting a little bit of UV light back in there. I don't think the windows block infrared, but yeah, they do definitely block UV. So you're not going to be able to get all the benefits of full spectrum light through a window, but you will get some.
Gotcha.
But the biggest downside is that it blocks UV light.
One question I like to ask everyone though is, and this is off the top, so I always think it's fun to ask. What does it mean, being healthy mean? I actually do have one other question, but what does being healthy mean to you?
So to me, being healthy kind of means like having a balance with like mental, emotional, physical health. So definitely just like for me, I have to remember to like not get like too neurotic about like food and stuff like that. Like just like having a meal with like family or like going out to eat once in a while with family or with friends. That can be like super beneficial to your health. Actually help you like digest food better as well when you're like eating with other people and socializing. So definitely just like remembering to like have balance in life and just like enjoy life as well and not get too like strict or regimented.
100%.
That's something I like to incorporate.
Yeah. I feel like a lot of these, it's funny. It's the irony of a lot of these health professionals are probably, some of them, and I've been in that position where you're so neurotic about stuff that you're probably in worse health than a lot of people that are eating junk food and don't have a care in the world.
Yeah. And it's like your thoughts too, like your thoughts govern your health. Like anything that's like happening or any like emotional stuff that's happening has probably more of an effect on your health than like what you're eating. So that's only something I just like try to keep in mind. Like if you're like eating something bad and the whole time you're like, oh my God, like this is so bad for me, like blah, 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 like whatever, that's going to be worse than like eating the food itself.
Yeah.
So that's just something like I need to remind myself of from time to time, but that's only something that has improved my health. Like since I started on like my whole health journey and everything like that, that's definitely something that once I like stopped being like so regimented, I definitely saw a huge like improvement in my own health.
Speaking of, how did you get into Ray Pete in that sort of world?
So I actually, when I first kind of got into health, I was more of like plant-based. I thought like meat was bad for you. And I was like, yeah, I was not eating meat. I was trying to just like eat as many plants as possible, that kind of thing. But once I think I actually like ran into like Ray Pete and like those concepts on Instagram. But a lot of it like made a lot of sense to me. Not that I'm like, I strictly like follow any like particular like diet or like Ray Pete diet. I'm not, strict about it, but a lot of his work definitely influenced like how I view saturated fat, things like that. So yeah, it definitely was counter to the mainstream, counter to things I had heard. But it did make a lot of sense. So
what about Reyes talked about the serotonin light connection? What do you think about that?
Yeah, he says that like serotonin is actually a stress hormone, right?
Yeah.
And that like it's not as good as everyone thinks. It's interesting. I think he's probably right in some regard, where probably a lot of people have too much serotonin and not the other way around. But I think it's still possible for people to have not enough. Specifically, if you're low in like the precursor to serotonin, which I think is like the amino acid like tryptophan. So he's saying that like, oh, okay, most people have high tryptophan because they're eating too many muscle meats, right? Mm-hmm. They're not getting enough of the like anti-inflammatory amino acids. So I definitely think that's possible. Personally, I always test for low tryptophan.
Really?
So I'm actually the opposite of that. So I'm like, oh, I don't know. I don't know if I follow that. Also, I think the people that have high serotonin are typically high histamine people, right?
Yeah.
So I'm not like a high histamine, high serotonin person. So it's the opposite for me. But I think for a lot of people, it's probably true.
He also mentioned, and it was interesting hearing you because dopamine and serotonin tend to be antagonistic to one another or opposites. And you said, I forget exactly what you said. I don't want to butcher what you said, but about getting enough light being necessary for dopamine production to properly stimulate the formation of the eyeball. And he has talked about how serotonin actually sensitizes you to the light. So it makes the light seem brighter, I believe, which can actually damage the eyes.
That makes sense. So yeah, if you're like a high serotonin, yeah, if you have high histamine as well, that kind of dilates the blood vessels, right? Yeah. So that type of person, I could see that. But that also has to do with the nervous system too. And so like if someone's ciliary muscle is fatigued, that also has to do with the muscles in the eye, right? So I think that more has to do with your nervous system. So if someone's under a lot of stress, their eyes aren't going to dilate, aren't going to constrict enough when they're in the light, and they're going to stay too dilated, and that's why they're light sensitive. Oh, because the signal isn't the proper signal isn't going from the brain to the eye to tell the eye what to do.
That makes sense,
and that has to do with the nervous system as well. But yeah, I've never looked into the serotonin component with that. That's interesting. So you were saying serotonin. What were you saying?
He was saying the elevated serotonin, which it does act as a vasodilator as well in some contexts, which is basically what you just said, sensitizes you to light. And I believe it says maybe it allows too much light to get in, which I think is also along the lines of what you just said. And that can actually cause damage to the eyes.
That would make sense. Yeah. So I think it's probably a combination of things that causes it. But yeah, they say that like people that are stuck in fight or flight, their eyes are like too dilated most of the time. So maybe like if your eyes are too dilated, that can also be a sign that you have too high serotonin.
I would have thought your eyes
context.
I would have thought your eyes constrict during flight or flight. No, so you could see better, but is it the opposite?
Actually, they would open up because that's how you like get more light in the eye.
Oh, that makes sense.
Your eyes kind of open, like the pupils kind of open up when they want to let more light in the eye. And that's like you're on high alert. So you're like, oh shit, like anything can happen. I need to like be on high alert. I need to like be really susceptible to light.
Okay. And that
light signals.
And would that open up your periphery then?
No, if you're in fight or flight, you're closing up your periphery.
Okay.
Because you're only focusing on like the immediate threat.
A more constricted pupil allows you to view the periphery better.
More constricted pupil, you're actually limiting light. So it's like, oh, okay, like, you know, I'm calmer. I don't need to be like on high alert, like looking for any type of light signal that could pop up. Yeah.
And then my last question for you was, what are the biggest issues and practices you'd like to see fixed within the field of ophthalmology or optometry?
The thing I really wanted to help with more that I felt like I wasn't able to was mainly just like proper education. So I feel like a lot of times patients are just like given a diagnosis and it just like becomes their identity. And so they're not really told like what lifestyle changes or what dietary changes they could do to actually like stop the progression or fix their condition. And a lot of the times they're given like a really poor prognosis, or they're just not properly educated on, you know, how they could prevent it from getting worse or how they could have like prevented it in the first place. So I really just think like more of a focus on prevention would be cool. And there's a lot of like really cool technology that I think can be used for like early detection, early prevention. So I just think if there was more of a focus on that, we could just help a lot more people.
Is that in terms of myopia you're saying, or diseases in general?
Well, myopia, the big thing I wish I could change with that is like not telling myopes to like wear their glasses all the time. Because usually like when someone is told they're myopic, they're like, okay, here's a pair of glasses, wear them all the time. And it's not really stressed to them that like by wearing these glasses all the time, and like, let's say they're wearing them for computer work, it's not told to them that they're wearing glasses that are 20 times too strong.
Yeah.
So I think definitely patient education is one thing I wish I could.
Well, you're doing a good job. You have one of my favorite Instagrams out there. Your account is awesome.
Oh, awesome. Thank you. That means a lot.
You're the only person talking about this sort of stuff. So it was so cool getting into you and hearing you talk about PRI. Maybe we'll get you and Elena on at some point. We can have you both go back and forth. That'd be fun.
Yeah, I've actually learned so much from her. I find it so fascinating because she works with like neuro-optometrists a lot. Mm-hmm. And it's so fascinating how she like puts, like I already knew how much posture impacted vision, but I love actually seeing someone like put it into practice, because that's something like I have never seen in the field before.
Yeah.
So I think she's really like a game changer for like practicing optometrists, especially people that want to have like more of like a holistic approach and care more about like the whole body in general, and not just like giving a new prescription out and giving someone a new prescription every year, for example, and just like being like, oh, you got worse, here's a new prescription. I
would ask my eye doctors, like, is there anything to the vision drills or anything like that you can do to, you know, maybe improve your vision or at least prevent it? And she's a very nice woman. I have no issues with her. Good eye doctor, in my opinion, yes. But she was like, yeah, there's nothing you can do. It's just kind of, you know, luck of the draw. And it's crazy how much that has to do with.
It's crazy.
Like, it's just not, it's kind of not.
Yeah,
not
I mean,
true.
it's a shame. It's a shame because like, that's like what you're taught, right? So usually like a lot of people, when they're taught something in school, they don't like seek out new information. And if new information does present to them, they already have a bias. Like they already have cognitive bias against it because it's opposite of what they were taught. So it's funny because I'm in like a forum, like a Facebook group for like eye doctors. Someone posted the other day something from someone's Instagram being like, sunglasses like prevent vitamin D production. They were like, oh, just a quick Google search doesn't like necessarily like refute this, but like my gut instinct is that like this can't be true because like you're only told good things about sunglasses in optometry school. So people were just like, yeah, it's quackery, it's not true, blah, blah, blah. And someone's like, yeah, light in the eyes doesn't affect melanin production, which is just like a quick like journal article search. You could see like light in the eyes does impact melanin production. So yeah, I just think there's like a lot of like misconceptions, especially about light, because like if you're just like drilled into like for 4 years that something's bad, it's hard to like change your belief around something when like you have like such a strong cognitive bias.
Yeah. That's one of the things.
So yeah, when
I
did bring that up, the doctor I brought that up to was like, oh yeah, I'm sorry, I guess I was wrong. Which like, that's cool. Like when people can like admit that like they're wrong about something and change their belief. Like a lot of people, that's hard for them to do. And Alina actually talked to me a little bit about this, but she was saying like the more locked up people are in their body, the harder it is for them to like change their beliefs.
Oh, wow.
So the more like open-minded people are, I think my headphones just died. The more open-minded people are, that's actually reflected in your posture, and it's also probably reflected in the eye prescription as well.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised if there was a study out there about this. There might be. But I think like myopes tend to have like certain personality traits, and they're kind of more of a fixed mindset and less open-minded.
Yeah, it's one of those things back to like the omega-3s and sunblock argument, where I saw someone like one of the evidence-based practitioners, and they all want their meta-analysis, and there's no evidence that high consumption of the vegetable oils or omega-3s will increase your ability to sunburn. I was like, I mean, you're right, there's no studies in this, but this is day one chemistry that we know they're significantly less stable. So like you have to, the rule of thumb, science generally prevails. Like chemistry generally, there's this underlying stuff that is true until proven otherwise, versus the other way around. Like we understand that UV light has to do with melanin production. Why would we assume that it doesn't? Very dogmatic.
Yeah, and I just feel like a lot of people on the forum were just like dismissing it without researching it, right? Yeah. Or like, just because like they have such a strong cognitive bias, they won't even like put the time in to like research it or figure out like, oh, maybe this is true. But like they were like, oh, they were like asking me like, oh, do you think this like would have a big impact on vitamin D? And I was just like, there's no like legit studies on it, but it makes sense just because most of your photoreceptors are in the eyes, right?
Yeah.
So like, yeah, you have photoreceptors in the skin, but what would have more of an impact, right?
Yeah.
So I definitely think there's things that we don't know, right? But they just like intuitively make sense.
Yeah, I think I've been thinking about a definition for holistic medicine or in my head. And I think in some sense, holistic medicine is, I don't want to say tendency, it's not the right word, but let's say the tendency to not deny anything. Like you'll take any sort of evidence, anecdotal or whatnot. It could be mumbo jumbo, doesn't need to have anything, and take it into account. You don't have to like say, you tell me sunglasses are bad, and that means I'm throwing all my sunglasses, but you say, oh, that does make sense, and that could be true.
Yeah, I definitely think holistic practitioners tend to keep more of an open mind about things. So I don't know if that's like, something that is just like drilled into it in school, and like, or if it's just like their personality type is more likely to go to school, to have like a longer track in school. So again, it's like, there's so many factors. It's hard to say if like, oh, it was like their personality trait to start with, or if like being like drilled something in school all those years is what kind of like makes them more inflexible.
Yeah, probably a little bit of both.
But I think it's probably a combination.
There you go. Awesome. Well, I think we can go ahead and wrap this up. Where can everyone find you?
Yeah, they can find me on Instagram. My handle is Optimizing Health.
Isn't it Optimizing Health?
No, it's someone else said that to me once. It's just Optimizing Health.
Oh, I don't know why I thought it was Optimizing Eye Health.
Someone said that to me the other day too. I was like, no.
That's funny.
It's just Optimizing Health, yeah.
Well, I highly recommend everyone give Taylor a follow. Taylor, hold on a minute while we wrap up the show. And thank you so much for coming on. This was a great conversation. I hope everyone will enjoy it. And that's it for this episode of the ThermoDiet. Until next time, guys, be good.